Join us on our Discord, the Greater Mandala. For access, sign up to the Order of Fire's mailing list.
All right, this is Jack Donovan, and you are listening to or watching PH2T3R, Pater, the Journal of Solar Culture. And I'm here, as always, with my co-host, C.B. Robertson, author of many fine books, and as well, Ed Hamann, who's our Vedic expert, but also spent years teaching and studying food all around the world, and teaching cooking and things like that. So he's our expert on food. And Chris, we were trying to decide what we wanted to talk about the other day, and he said food, but it was only in messages, and he had sent me some circle videos in Telegram, and I didn't listen to him. It's like, food, what are you talking about? But then he explained what he meant, and like we talk about a relationship with food on a philosophical level. And I was like, oh, okay, all right, I see where we could go with this. Not just talking about like what do you like? What are your favorite foods? But more like food on a philosophical level. And when you talk about different philosophies and religions, and as Ed mentioned before the show, in groups and out groups, food is something that is used to create culture. And these are the foods of our culture that we eat. Like these are people like people have a very strong association with it, right? Because they're that's how they grew up. That's what they grew up eating. I'm from Pennsylvania Dutch country. We eat this thing that's called like pot pie, but it's not really a pie. It's basically dough soup. And there's I was looking on something today, and someone said something about coleslaw, and I was like, well, coleslaw. I know about coleslaw and potato salad. But there's things that come from every region that people like associate with their homeland, and then one step further with religions and philosophies and so forth. There's obviously there's like Ayurvedic stuff, which is its own little rabbit hole of mysticism, and then there's all kinds of food traditions that have to go with Catholicism and different pagan things. I know when we were, when I've been involved with pagan practices, people make, it reminds me of Wicker Man. Like they made like little cakes of the animals and so forth, the animal spirits to have out there. Food has just a really close connection to religion and philosophy.
Well, it would now be a good time to point out that much of our initial iconography as a group began with a particular, not a food, but a beverage, a holy beverage, and not coffee, but a close relative with the gold monster.
It's true.
Yeah,
it's true. I mean, that was actually one of our first things that people picked up on with the Order of Fire. Now, sadly, it is hard to come by anymore in America. You have to order it special. They don't carry it in gas stations and supermarkets like they used to, which is very sad. I don't know what conspiracy that has been aligned against us, but we can only imagine. It's probably the Illuminati. I don't know.
Yeah, the dragon cult seeking to deny us.
Yes,
but that does make it more special when you can you get that 18 pack or 12 pack from Amazon. Yes.
Yeah, and also we. Because we had to specify secondary energy drinks, so we got into a close second is obviously Red Bull, because we're the bulls and there's Red Bulls and they're facing the sun. It's pretty damn solar. If we wouldn't have started with Gold Monster, we probably would have started there. So I drink those a lot, but actually recently, I know perhaps it's haram, but I'm the Pope, so I guess I decide. I'm the decider. But I've started to just experimenting with, instead of buying energy drinks, because they're kind of expensive to be buying as many as I was drinking, I've started with caffeine pills and just like diet grapefruit soda in the morning, because I can have a ton of that. It's like $4 for the whole 12 pack. Yeah. And so that's kind of the cost savings. And I'm like, well, is it really just the caffeine? But it hasn't gotten me the whole way there yet. Like 450 milligrams of caffeine should get me there. That's the right amount of like Rockstar or Monster or whatever.
You need that B12, that guarana.
Yeah, there's something
or
else.
even-
I think it's the guarana. I don't know what it is. It might be. It
There's-
might be something like that.
There's something in it that hits you like right in the sides of the neck, and you're like, I'm awake now.
That's the holy solar magic. That's what that is. But all joking aside, I mean, but that is. I mean, it was a cultural thing we started with, and because there's an Indian kind of Vedic influence in the Order of Fire a little bit, partly courtesy of Ed and partly courtesy of stuff I wrote in Fire in the Dark. There's a little bit of a ghee thing that some people are into in the Order of Fire. I would use that more than I probably would have before. And but I wanted to start because when we talk about food rules, because that's, all these cultures have some kind of food rules. And that was one of the questions we were asked, like, what kind of food rules would you have? And what kind of food rules are worth having, I think is actually a better question. And so my one that I came up with right off the top of my head is that because someone also asked about masculinity. And I've said for years, and I fully believe that if you're going to eat meat, which you should, if you're going to eat meat, at some point in your life, preferably earlier than later, as a man, I think that you need to participate in the killing of an animal that you were going to eat. Because I think it's very important to be connected to that experience and understand what that is. And we've talked about briefly before the show, like veganism. Someone asked me about veganism the other day in an AMA. And my answer that I wanted to give, I wasn't even going to start that rabbit hole with that, but is that veganism is not a diet, it's an identity. And it's an identity that proceeds from a philosophy, and a philosophy that proceeds from a philosophical error. Basically, like, humans are omnivores. They always have been. And you need to understand, I think, to be a man in the world, a sane man in the world, you need to understand that all life comes from death. And there is no way around that. There is just like ways that make people feel nicer about it. But and there are really good ethical concerns about. I really like animals. I've killed some goats that liked me. We're friends. I really like animals. I'm not super into just killing animals for fun, whatever. And I don't like to see animals suffer. And so there are a lot of ethical concerns that people have with how animals are processed. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. People want more grass-fed beef or free-range chickens that like aren't just like stuck in pens, because that's gross. My introduction to this kind of thing was when I was 14. I wanted a job, and my dad got me a job on a turkey farm during Thanksgiving. So my first job ever was underage labor in a jacket. It's November in Pennsylvania, out there, like, literally, I think the first day I shoveled congealed blood. Like, that was my first, because they just basically what they would do is you just grab the turkey. I think I held some of them at some point, but later on probably. But you carry them in by their feet. They hang them up on a conveyor belt thing hanging from the air. I thought this was poetic even then. Like the electric turkey slicer that you use for Thanksgiving, to slit their throats as they go down the line. And they would just do that, and that's just how they would do it. And then they would go through this whole machine process. And then there were like ladies sitting there processing, pulling the skin down and doing all these different things to process to get these turkeys ready for Thanksgiving dinner for everybody. So, I mean, it was I think I was always really grateful that I had that experience. And the cool thing is that it didn't make me feel bad for turkeys. It made me think turkeys are like messed up animals, and I hate them. And because I had to deal with these turkeys, and they're just mean, and stupid. Yeah, so I never feel bad about eating turkey. But anyway, I think that's my first food rule that I would have, is that I do think that men should be involved in the slaughter and processing of an animal that they are going to eat at some point in their life. Just because I think it's important to understand. I don't know. What do you guys think other good food rules would be worth having?
Oh man. Well, I want to second that. I mean, I grew up basically pheasant hunting, and it was always a big occasion where my dad would take me and my brother out to, middle of the state, go to this farm where they had pheasants, and we usually get come back with somewhere between 6 and 12 birds, and my dad would actually pay me to breast them out and everything, and he had this way of cooking with the plum sauce. But when you participate in the killing of the animal and seeing where it comes from, and seeing, you try to make it as painless as possible, but that there is unpleasantness in that for the animal, and to a degree for you. It's not fun seeing the animals suffer. There's excitement, but also a degree of pity, for lack of a better word. And there's an effect at the dinner table where you become a lot less tolerant of wasted food. Whereas before, if food comes in a foam tray, it's like, it's it's packed in garbage, it's packed in plastic and styrofoam. A little bit of it that goes into the garbage with the styrofoam and plastic's no big deal. Someone's not really feeling hungry. It was a little bit overcooked for their taste. No big deal. Throw it in the garbage. When you have that experiential connection with where it comes from, it's a little bit harder to just throw that away. But my thought in bringing this up in the first place, the idea of food is, as a group, we've always had this focus on the body, partially based on ideals and aesthetics, partially based on it's just a better way to be. And there's the beginning of a sort of philosophizing with the body that you see in particularly Yukio Mishima's writing. And he developed that connection with the body and philosophizing with the body as a sort of foundation underneath philosophizing with words, partially to save words, but also partially to give this philosophical inclination something solid and real to grab onto, and the body was his solution to that problem. And he explored that in particular with steel, but you can also do that with food in your body, and because your body is, well, it functions based on inputs and outputs, right? The better quality foods you put into it, the better outputs you're going to get from it. And so, like, understanding that connection becomes really important if you are not some sort of Kantian, or not Kantian, Cartesian dualist, where you think the mind is something completely separate from the body. It has nothing to do with the body. If you're like, no, the mind is a part of the body, and it gets fed by the things that you feed the body. So if you want to develop your mind as well as your body for its own sake, what you feed it becomes really important. Just as, if you were to nerd out with guns, what kind of powder you're using becomes kind of important. That's not the best metaphor. Maybe a better one would be like a high performance car. You were going to want to be using higher quality gasoline. No one buys a Ferrari and puts the lowest quality unleaded gasoline in it, right? Do they do that? I don't know. I would assume not.
I've never had a Ferrari.
Yeah,
you might be surprised.
I would assume not. like well, if you're going to spend that kind of money on a nice car, don't you want to take care of it and to take it, get its oil changed regularly, do the regular maintenance? You want good inputs. It's the old saying, garbage in, garbage out.
Right.
And I think, so much of what we've talked about and borrowed to a degree from people like Matthew Crawford is this distrust in institutional knowledge, which is not inherently a distrust in experts, but a distrust in the the logic and mechanics of institutions as the givers of knowledge. And it leads to a strange phenomenon. This trust in institutions and in certain kinds of experts has led to a very strange phenomenon in the food world, which I think is called orthorexia, if you correct me if I'm wrong. But this kind of obsession with healthy eating, which I think is a symptom of a kind of distrust in your own judgment and a distrust in your own experience and a disconnection from your own bodily sensations. Like, after I eat this, how do I feel? And I think in the spirit of philosophizing with the body, if we were to sort of take what Yukio Mishima has given us and try to build on it a little bit, food is sort of the next logical point of exploration and discovery in our own potential with our bodies.
Well, orthorexia is a huge topic, and it cuts all kinds of different directions, because you have the religious perspectives where people can get orthorexic because they I didn't put the right thing that makes my humors, like whatever spirituality that you're talking about, there are like rules, and if you didn't do the right food things, the bad things might happen to you. It'll cause bad health or whatever. And some of those are based in reality and some of them aren't. But there's, placebo effects, psychosomatic effects with a lot of these things too. So if you eat something that is supposed to be sinful or bad, then you might actually feel bad from having done that, even though it may not actually have that effect. So there's that. So there's from a religious angle, you'll have things like that. And then what we have in terms of what you were talking about in institutions, especially after 2020, there was a big collapse in faith in institutions. I mean, we were seeing it before. I mean, like I said, I always joke to people that the first time I ever did paleo, it was called the caveman diet, and it was on a website with animated GIFs in 2002. And so I remember sitting there trying to because there was nothing you could buy for that, whatever. It was me eating raw meat and like spinach and stuff together and trying to make it taste good. Figuring I want to eat like a caveman. That sounds awesome. And so I've done many iterations of caveman, paleo, all that stuff, several times, including the last time I did it with right after I met the Liver King. And so I've done a bunch of versions of those over the years, and you kind of learn where the pitfalls are. That gets into orthorexia too, the carnivore orthorexia, you can only eat meat, or it's poison. There are people literally. I remember Liver King's wife literally telling me the herbs are bad for you, and then I then on the side, obviously the vegan side is the same way. If you eat meat, you're bad, like a bad person, and also it's bad for you some crazy way.
Yeah,
and it
raises your cholesterol.
Yeah. There's the distrust in the institutions that was happening, in the sense of everything we were told about heart health was pretty much a lie. I grew up. My parents ate margarine, which is garbage. But they ate margarine because it was supposed to be heart healthy, and it's not. and everybody admits that it's not now, but the people still eat it.
It's rebranded now. It's now plant-based butter.
Oh, it's plant-based butter. That sounds about right. Yeah. Do you eat it with your oat milk and whatever? Here's your completely synthetic trash that's plant-based.
All of this. Thinking of another rule. More of a perspective. We have the Lord of the Earth in the order of fire, and so. Right. I don't like to use the word balance, but when it comes to food, there's a time and a place. Right. There's a time, there's a time and a season, and there's maintenance. Yeah. So if you put it through the perspective of Lord of the Earth, you are maintaining your body and the bodies of the people that love you by, through food that makes you be able to maintain your life in a way that is happy and positive, strong. But then there's also celebration and there's indulgence,
Yeah.
And so a good rule is to have that proper perspective of time and place.
It's almost like you should eat like an adult.
Yeah, exactly.
We had to give I think I put it in the show notes here. Our buddy, he's also a member of the Order of Fire, Josh Wood, gave a TED talk in Hobart, down in Tasmania where he lives, called Eat Like an Adult. And one of the ideas was, a treat is a treat, I think. And we live in a society where we have treats all day long, and we're surrounded by treats, and people think that they should have treats all the time. I mean, I'm as guilty of this as anybody else. But if you think about the way that people lived throughout history, you'd have these feasts, but you don't have them every day.
No.
Like you'd have this big celebration and just go wild and eat all kinds of stuff. I mean, Thanksgiving was that way, but much older than that. All your ancient festivals, your feast days, and all those things are like big times where you get to celebrate the harvest or whatever. But people have gotten in the mindset where they have feasts every day. If you look at the way the average American eats, like they'll eat things that you would eat if you came back from a long day working in the fields or doing hard manual labor, and you've burned like 6,000 calories doing hard work all day. And yes, you could come home and eat this like giant plate of ground beef and like potatoes and all that kind of stuff because you've already burned 6,000 calories that day, and you're going to need it for tomorrow. But the average American who just goes to work and sits on their ass all day, they can't eat like that. But that's the American way of eating, is like big trays and big plates of food and whatever.
And the things that used to be for special occasions are available. People are eating those things every single day. Cake was for a party.
Yeah.
Even when I was, growing up in the 70s, cake wasn't just there all the time. I mean, your grandmother maybe had cake all the time because she was a grandmother and people came and she had to give them something. But it was something that you thought about in the future.
Yeah.
That a cake, cake is coming. And there used to be a time when oranges, which are something we think of, as really good for us, where you didn't get those until it was around Christmas time.
Yeah.
Because they were very, very seasonal.
My parents put little mandarin oranges in our Christmas stockings. That's like
an old
tradition.
Because they were very seasonal and it was a winter crop, and you weren't, you were going to get an orange for Christmas because that was the only time you were going to see one. And now they're everywhere. But we have a lot of success and a lot of freedom, and it's it's sort of like an intoxication that's been happening for decades, but ultimately it's irresponsible in a lot of ways. But when you suddenly have a huge middle class and work changes from labor to sitting on your ass, and you have money to buy whatever you want, you start eating a bunch of crap.
Yeah. Well, I wanted to circle back for a second to the collapse of trust in institutions, because we've seen something happen from that, like in the like I said, it was happening before with things like cholesterol and heart health and all that kind of stuff. Like people were wising up to it. I mean, I was writing about paleo stuff in like 2014 probably. You eat butter or whatever, but. What happened in 2020 is obviously there was a massive fallout of like, we don't trust the government and what they say about anything at all.
Not even the food pyramid.
Yeah, not even the food pyramid, which they keep changing to make worse. The slave food pyramid is basically what it is. It's like, here's all the slave food. And man, that gets into a philosophical thing. I'll jump back to that in a second. But what I forgot about that. That's a cool one. What I wanted to bring up was just the way that spawned a whole bunch of trends that were really based on nonsense. But this idea that everything natural is good and everything like manufactured or whatever, and people giving themselves basically orthorexia about seed oils, about all these things. Like they think that eating these natural things are miracle cures for all these problems that you shouldn't even have. There's so many, like, why are you so sensitive? I mean, I'm all for, eating less processed foods. That sounds like a smart idea. But the idea that your body is so fragile that if you have this, then all of a sudden you get skin cancer and all these other bad things that happen to you. I'm old enough to not believe that because I've been eating all that stuff all my life.
Same.
And I'm in really, really good health. But I guess when you're like 25 and you're on the internet perpetually getting health advice from like weird, like natural food gurus, you could believe that, oh my God, if I eat this, I will die. Like you're gonna be sick. Yeah. I mean, people didn't care about gut health. Now I go to the supermarket and people didn't like. What are you even talking about? Guts? Like, is someone dead? But yeah, you go to the supermarket now. It's like super trendy. All these women. There's that whole new brand of sodas that are like poppy or something like that have like digestive enzymes in them. And people being really concerned with that. I mean, obviously the kombucha craze kind of started a lot of that, and fermented foods, which all these things are good, but people just get a little, crazy about them, and it's just, kind of a sign of something else. And like I said, it's a sign of them not trusting any authorities, which may have better answers sometimes. I think, obviously I think they threw the baby out with the bathwater a little bit.
Yeah. Well, and this kind of, I think, ties back to the paleo is such an interesting illustration of this, the dynamic at work, because the philosophy behind paleo is really solid, is really good. It's like, okay, what did we evolve eating? Maybe it would make sense that we would be healthier if we ate what we had evolved to eat. Freaking brilliant, solid. Problem. How do you figure out what we were eating 10,000 years ago? Well, you can try to reverse engineer it and be like, well, agriculture didn't come into place until, the Sumerians or whenever. So we probably weren't eating grains before then. Well, it turns out we actually probably were. The fact that we weren't farming doesn't mean we weren't harvesting wild grains in the same way that you harvest wild berries and stuff. So it's actually like really tricky to reverse engineer, but the logic is good. But people can get caught up in very theoretical philosophies of food rather than learning to feel what their body senses. And this is where it's so hard to resist the temptation to just go back to Nietzsche on everything. Nietzsche was so sensitive to what food did, and I think this is why he was so vociferously hateful towards alcohol, because he could sense what that was doing. One of my favorite lines, sort of a jokey line, was at one point he said Buddhism was a symptom of excessive rice consumption. But I think the most relevant line from Nietzsche comes from, as it pertains to orthorexia. And I was having a conversation with someone earlier today, and the word is escaping me. Mithridatic principle came up. There's this line at the beginning of The Birth of Tragedy where he's describing the sort of Bacchic chorus, this Dionysian entourage, whether this is Mardi Gras or one of these other festivities of health and exuberant life and vitality and sometimes sexuality. And I pulled it up here. He says, there are some who, from lack of experience or obtuseness, will turn away from such phenomena as folk diseases. In other words, they're looking on these things as like the sickness of the lower classes, with a smile of contempt or pity prompted by the consciousness of their own health. Of course, the poor wretches do not divine what a cadaverous-looking and ghastly aspect this very health of theirs presents when the glowing life of the Dionysian revelers rushes past them. And whenever I see a picture of, not to pull too many names in a negative context, but whenever I see a picture of like Brian Johnson, the guy who's this investor who's trying to live forever now. And one part of me is like, oh, cool, someone's experimenting with their body. We can see how that goes. I'm all for people doing science with their own skin in the game. I think that's neat. However, when you look at his stuff, and he's describing how he feels great and stuff, it's like, okay, that might be interesting. He looks like a ghost.
Yeah, it looks terrible.
And it's not just that he's pale. There's something about him that looks like this ghostly, cadaverous looking health that Nietzsche described. And it's one of the lines of The Last Men. We have our health, they say, and blink thereby, or however the line goes. So like people who become too doctrinal about it, about their food and their health. And we were starting to talk about rules, and it's not bad to have rules as it comes to food, but it does matter tremendously where you're choosing to take those rules from. And I think as a starting point, experimenting and learning to trust your own body, and like taking a food journal if you have to. We were mocking gut health stuff, and for good reason. There's a lot of nonsense about gut health. However, my distrust in institutional health sort of began in 2012, somewhere in there, where I got an ulcerative colitis diagnosis. And that's why I had to leave the military. And they said you basically have two options. You can either have a colonectomy, or you can go on these drugs that will give you some time. And I was like, how about screw you both, and I'm gonna see if I can find a second opinion. I talked with some naturopaths, and they put me on an elimination diet. Now, I can't prove definitively what happened and how I wound up where I am today, which is essentially completely symptom-free for like 4 or 5 years now. But my hypothesis, my guess is that the Accutane that the Navy put me on, which is a synthetic vitamin A, very high grade drug that no one should be on, no matter what they tell you, killed off a bunch of my gut biome. And I think through a combination of this elimination diet that the naturopaths had me go on, and gradually recolonizing my gut over some years after that, I was able to get back to a state of more or less normalcy. It's just a guess. I don't know that for certain. I know I can eat whatever I want now and not have problems. But that wasn't the case in like 2014.
Yeah, I mean, there's so much. The gut biome is one of those big mysteries. There are people who are like, it's more of your mind than your mind is.
Might be.
Like there's all kinds of people. Yeah. Who knows? I don't know. But
it might be exaggerating.
There's all kinds of stuff about that. One of the things that is if you dramatically change your diet, your gut biome really isn't adapted for that, and so it'll take a little while. I mean, I've known that going to paleo and not paleo so much, but if you go full carnivore, there's a pretty good consensus of what happens for about 3 or 4 weeks.
Carnivore is an interesting one because I had a good friend who actually tried carnivore for a long time, on the assumption that plants were poison, as was stated before. And after a couple of years, he came to realize, it's like, wait, plants are poison. I need to be eating more plants. Because what he discovered was something that Jordan Peterson described on Joe Rogan, which is Jordan Peterson famously went on carnivore for a while. And then like one day he had a couple sips of apple cider and then was just completely wrecked for like a week after that. And there's a kind of fragility that my friend observed in himself when he saw mirrored in Jordan Peterson as well. When you go on this pure carnivore, it's like, is that the picture of health and resilience that I want to be? Maybe not. Maybe these poisons actually have some utility for the human body. And I mean, it was funny. We decided to do food. Was it yesterday? And then today, Lane Norton posted a sequence on Instagram about how like people talk about this is poison, that's poison, this is all the things are poison. He's like, how are we all not dead? We should all be dead if these are all poisons. He's like, maybe whether something is a poison or not comes down to the dosage. Maybe if you eat a straight like nightshade flower, that's going to be really bad for you, but a potato is actually fairly nutritious, you know, despite being in the nightshade family and having some of those nightshade poisons in them, poisons in scare quotes. And a little bit of that might actually be good for you in the way that, you know, a little bit of forest fires every once in a while are good for the trees.
Yeah, I've heard paleo people get into that nightshade thing. Like it's tomatoes. Is it potatoes too? I don't know.
Tomatoes and potatoes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And a few others.
Yeah, but I don't eat nightshades. Like I've literally heard that. I've heard that said in real life. Yeah, you can get really. One of the things that Ajak always says about this that I like, and this is why I like him. He's like, if you can't eat something off, your line is weak. Like your line is weak. If you can't eat, like, oh, I had something that was like bad for me today, and you're like just wrecked and like your line is weak.
Well, I have to mention, speaking of strong lines, Mick Tubis was one of the first commenters here. He said Sicilian here. This is correct. The Sicilians, who are not only prolific tomato eaters, if memory serves, having invented the deep dish pizza, right? But am I remembering that correctly? I believe that's where that comes from, but it's called the Sicilian at the pizzeria that I used to work at. But Sicily is home to one of the world famous blue zones, one of these places where people regularly live into their 80s, 90s, 100s. There's a National Geographic article that came out in the 90s, had this Sicilian farmer, was in his like 90s, 94, 95, hauling like an 80-pound pig across the yard, no problem. Strong into not just like making it there in an old folks home, but like living and working into their 80s, 90s, along with Okinawa and Loma Linda, California. But like they're eating nightshades. Their health is, I mean, they are eating good foods. They're not eating crap. It's not like commercial McDonald's twice a week. But like their diet was also, as the author of the National Geographic article noted, these populations were not actually eating that differently than other towns and villages that were not that far away, which were not blue zones, that were not regularly making it into their 80s, 90s, 100s. And it didn't appear to be just genetics either. Although you have to have a certain, baseline of genetics to be a candidate for these blue zones. So it's like food, orthorexia is not what's making these people live these long, fulfilling, strong lives into their 80s and 90s. It's a component, but like many of these older people would fail the test of like healthy eating by many of these Western.
They smoke and drink wine.
People. Yeah, right.
In a lot of these places, they smoke and drink wine. There's a lot of things.
They sit down at the table and eat with people that matter to them.
Yeah, there's a strong intergenerational connection. That was the thing that struck me as the common chord that tied them all together. Now, the strongest of strong intergenerational connections will probably not save you if you're eating, Kraft mac and cheese and McDonald's every day. There's a certain baseline of quality food, because again, inputs and outputs. If you're, I think microplastics are one of the most like exaggerated fears around running around the internet
it's the
today.
new exaggerated fear. Wait till it gets to like the peak of like we aren't even close to peak microplastics yet.
Yeah,
like that's just that's like this. No one talked about that like last year.
Yeah, but I mean, that said, and like don't get yourself into a tizzy about microplastics. Like your great grandfathers were full of lead and managed to like live decent life. Now it's still good to avoid lead, and you should probably not be microwaving your food in plastic every single day. Glassware, good upgrade. If you can't afford it, your plastic's not going to kill you.
Well, and there's the thing. It's really hard to study food in the body because there's so many different variables with people constantly. Like, well, is this doing this in this person or that person is very different, and
right.
Like there's a baseline like my baseline of like health and exercise compared to someone else my age. What are the microplastics going to do to them versus me? How big of an impact is a small thing going to have? It's probably going to have more impact on somebody who's like obese. Someone who's
more
obese and never exercises, who's like predisposed really to having health problems. Because and a lot of people say this, it's become more and more popular recently. Is like you see with like older relatives and things like that. So many of people's, especially Americans' health problems proceed from obesity. Like they start to be like, oh, I have bad knees, I have bad ankles, oh, I have bad circulation, oh, I have diabetes. All these
You're
things,
fat.
All these things are a cascade from being fat. And so like if you're just not fat and you also, exercise, you're not just like because you stopped eating, you're not just like thin because you don't eat. But if you're exercising and you're healthy, a lot of these things are not problems. But if you're not doing any of those things and you are fat or you're just like very unhealthy in every other way, I think that you're more vulnerable to a lot of these outside forces. I think that's a major factor. But here, since it's a pause, I'm going to run our commercial.
Okay.
Because since we had a natural pause, I wanted to let everybody know that we talked about these shirts. And we just have different lighting, but we're wearing the same shirt. Like Chris and I are wearing the same shirt. This is the adventure shirt that is now available through our store. And I made a little ad. It is really hard for me to film ads right now because I want to be filming me walking around having an adventure in this shirt, except for it's 110 degrees. So I sweat through the shirt in like 5 minutes and the camera goes off because it's too hot. So it's not the best time for me to film action shots right now. But even early in the morning, it's I have a couple hours. Anyway, so I'll put that on real quick.
Introducing the Adventure Collection from the Order of Fire. The Adventure Shirt, designed by Jack Donovan in thick, flexible cotton for an athletic fit, with a bold collar and safari chest pockets. And the Adventure Cap in waxed cotton, now available in our store at theorderoffire.com.
All right, so the shirts are now available in our store. There's a link in the notes. And obviously these hats are also available as well. They're waxed cotton, so they'll actually be nicer when it's raining, because the water will kind of go off of them. They're made to be thick like that, and yeah. So those shirts are available now, and you can check them out in our store. But and I wanted to laugh because like on the show we can get behind the scenes stuff, and I thought this has this kind of Indiana Jones vibe that I wanted to go for with these, and I'm like, I should go out to the petroglyphs. Here are these ancient scroll. This is some archaeological looking shit, and I've hiked out there 3 or 4 times now. And they're really cool that they're just available there. Like no one's out there. Like literally, I pulled in the parking lot because it's so hot out. There was nobody in the parking lot except for me, for the trailhead, and walked there. Didn't see a soul the entire day. Carried this shirt in a hanger in a garment bag on my back as I'm walking there because trying to keep the shirt nice until I set up the camera and everything. So that actually what went into doing that. It's like I'm walking around shirtless, carrying this shirt, until I get to the moment where I can put it on for until it gets so hot that it's now sweated through. But I think it'll be a nice shirt for once it gets a little cooler and it's fall for a lot of people. But anyway. That I just wanted to throw that out there for you guys in case you've been following or waiting for that. But anyway, so one of the things I wanted to bring up about food, you touched on it earlier, is the psychological impact of changing the food pyramid. And I said slave food, and that there are huge cultural ties to who gets to eat meat and who doesn't. Going back to animals, like who gets like pack animals, like the highest pack animal gets the best parts.
Who gets the liver? Yeah.
Yeah. Who gets the liver? Who gets the best parts? That cascades the whole way into human society. Is to obviously the highest status people get to eat more meat. And there's this great book. I haven't looked at it in years, but. The Theory of the Leisure Class by Thorstein Veblen. And I wrote some pieces on it several years ago. And one of the things was that higher culture, like aristocratic culture, was all so. If you look at their iconography and everything, it's all related to like hunting. In like European, the iconography for the great houses of Europe, their coats of arms and everything. There's all these animals and they're related to hunting because it was a posh thing to do in Europe is to go hunting because it heralds back to these people came from warrior kings. Basically, they came from warrior kings who conquered the area that they're in. And then they keep that tradition alive. This is why we're good. We go out hunting. The poor people can't do that. They have to farm. But we go out hunting because it's part of our sporting, our hunting, our warrior way of life, and they bring that up. And of course, it got very fancy, when you get into like England and whatever eventually. But this idea that the wealthier classes eat good meat and it's expensive and hard to get for the poor classes. And so the idea of moving the food pyramid so that most people are eating what the lower classes had to eat. It's part of the whole thing of shrinking the middle class and what that looks like. The idea of having a steak on every table at every dinner, like, no, that's not for you. It's just creating a new oligarchy. And it's really insidious. And it says what an emotional impact that food like that has in terms of like, oh, we can't, like, me having a steak as a man is related to my prosperity. Me being able to have my prosperity and my success and whatever. And if I can't have it and only the rich people have, it's an interesting psychological game that they're playing to set it up. These ideas, these people who want us to be at zero red meat and barely having chicken and eating the fake meat. That they were trying to sell, which hasn't done very well, delightfully. Like all the Impossible burgers and everything that are just absolute trash, and terrible for you. The idea that they're, putting like we're going to give you fake meat and fake food, and all these, like I said, the oat milk and all the garbage that they've had. But I just think that's an interesting angle too. Is like the psychological warfare of like kind of oligarchs versus the lower class that happens with food.
Yeah.
Ed, I bet there's probably some tie-ins into stuff that you know about there.
Yeah, I mean, there's opposites as well when it comes, sometimes the social status is about a different sort of moral lens. Like if you're looking at India, for instance, it's sort of flip-flopped in that sense that, being vegetarian holds some sort of, special status spiritually, morally, even though most of India eats meat, actually. So, but it's related to class, to what we call caste and class. So many food rules you couldn't even the food rules that are for very specific small groups. But thinking here, but also meat. There's one group. You've probably heard somebody say outcasts or untouchables. There's a group of people that are called Dalits that are outside of those four varnas. The Shudra, Vaishya, Kshatriya, Brahmin, that have food rules for each of those groups: who you can eat it with, who can distribute, who can you take it from. But this sort of group of people that are outside of that system, they are eating all of the things that nobody else can eat. And it's not much documentation about it. It's actually becoming there's a book I saw recently that's coming out where somebody is writing a book about this cuisine. And it's all the parts of animals that other people don't eat is what they have access to, and it's part of their so-called lower status within the society.
I wonder what do you think the health differential is with them and other people? That would be interesting.
Well, there's so many things that go into that, though, like with living conditions and not having access to the same sort of things that somebody else might have.
Yeah. I
know there's sanitation issues with a lot of stuff. I've seen some videos of here, look at the Indian street food. Here, he's just mixing it with his hands and then giving it to you.
And one of the things that they can eat freely is beef. Of course, India has Christians, Muslims, both no problem with eating beef. Still, more often it's going to be
pork.
Pork as well. Though a lot of people it's just not as common. It's not as common in a place like Delhi, which has a very large Muslim population, even though it's still Hindu dominant, and many Hindu meat eaters can eat pork if they want to. It just doesn't happen. But then if you go to Goa, which is this tiny little place that was a Portuguese colony that's in southwest India, it's predominantly Catholic, and Catholicism means pork.
Right.
That's its whole purpose, if you ask me.
And fish on Friday.
So there's a whole bunch of really great pork preparations, and a lot of them have roots in Europe. It's sort of a fusion cuisine of sort of Iberia and Southwest India coming together.
There's a very interesting thing that goes, because you brought up hunting and the importance of killing your own food at least once, and the sort of aristocracy versus the low class. It's taken on a very interesting dynamic, I think, in the United States, because hunting in Europe is a purely aristocratic thing. Well, not purely, but largely aristocratic. In the United States, it's actually kind of low class in many places. So
less so now.
It becomes about how you do it. Because many of my white trash coworkers, electricians and construction people, they go out in their construction hoodie. If they're gun hunting, most of them are bow hunters. Most of them go out with their compound bow, because the seasons work out that the animals are a lot dumber during bow season. So you actually have better luck with a bow oftentimes. Then you look at how rich people go hunting. You look at, for example, Donald Trump Jr. and his mountain sheep hunting trips. And they're this 10 guys going up in some peak on some like weird, like someone's private land estate in the mountains, and they're all decked out in Kuyu gear. They've got these like Christians in arms, like 4-pound 6.5 PRC, right? Like super like $3,000 rifles and all this equipment. And it's as much about showcasing the equipment and the gear and the social proof of being out there with all these people. Oh, I went bow hunting with Joe Rogan. I went bow hunting with Jocko Willink or Cameron Haynes. These are like names that the famous people go hunting with.
Right.
And you may as well be on a horse in a red coat with foxhounds at that point, you know, which is very different than being that Robin Hood guy in a tree stand on public land, you know, with your face painted green, wearing a flannel shirt.
Yeah, well, I mean, and that's one of the things that I think why Americans are so attached to meat, and why Americans are so attached to hunting and things like that, is because obviously we didn't get people didn't get to do that in Europe, like the poor, like the poors.
Yeah, and there's something very American about that. Like we're a land without, or we have an aristocracy, but part of our identity is in not having an aristocracy despite having one. So there's the attachment still holds. You know, it's not as much of a problem as it looks like it is on paper.
Yeah.
And so many, and I mean, obviously, you know, over the last 200 something years here, there was an abundance of, you know, animals to eat as well. You know, it's a really big place. You know, there's a big piece of land, and there was just, you could go and people went and got a piece of land for themselves because it was there, and there was buffalo or deer or whatever, and they could set up. But you know, all these trends happened with foods. You know, if you look at all of the 20th century, you know, there was time, you know, all the fat, you know, butter and all of these things were like, ooh, you know, we're so fancy. And then all of a sudden, you know, people decided they wanted to be slim. You see these, you know, like trends happening throughout the 20th century. It's like all the ladies wanted to be thin. And then there was also simultaneously access to more people of different classes of certain foods. And then it's like, oh, those people eat that greasy stuff. I'm on the diet. And even with just look at the 50s, like a woman baking bread in the 50s. Oh, poor Barbara. She should have never married Steve. She's baking bread. You know, and now if you're not making your own bread, you're a jerk. You know.
Well, yeah, I mean, it becomes a different status of like, look, we can do we have the leisure time to do these things that poor people have to just go to the store and buy stuff because they have to work. But that brings me though to a point that you probably don't hear people on the not left talk about as often, but food deserts. They talk about that a lot on the left, but it's a real thing.
I had never heard the term. I'd never heard the term until about 2 weeks ago. I heard it mentioned by someone on podcast. I'm like, I'd never heard it called that. But in driving around to many different parts of the United States as a truck driver and as a service tech, I've seen them. I've been in neighborhoods where there is no good food, like no Safeway, no like good grocery store. It's just like gas stations and like crappy little hole in the wall marts that I wouldn't feed food to my kids from this place for like 15 miles. Which sort of dovetails into, I mean, you spoke about the importance of at least once in your life killing your own meat, but you know, we don't, well, unless you're a carnivore, for now, we don't eat meat alone. And part of that self-reliance and that relationship with food and the sensitivity to food and its effect on you that you can develop is by growing your own vegetables as well. We've been trying to do a little bit of that. We've got a sad attempt at a vegetable garden at the moment. The chickens have been much better as providers of some animal nutrients, eggs. I think we have like 40 of them right now. But despite losing a chicken last weekend, but I can't recommend highly enough Stick Saxon Hammer on YouTube. And I mean, most people go to him for his like political commentary and stuff, but just as a like when he talks about, I don't think he's vegetarian, but he talks a lot about gardening and how to do it and how to cook it in ways that's good and nutritious and also fun. And there's loads and loads of resources. He's just a particularly fun one who's like on the, I think you very nicely called the not left. He's certainly not a right winger, but he's very much not a left winger either. And it's just an interesting, cool character. Has been talking about gardening for like a decade, and has some good tips and tricks for again developing that deeper relationship with your body by way of food. And one of the fun things that comes out of both hunting and gardening is that it actually develops a third relationship, which is your relationship with the land. That nothing like teaches you about the place you live in, like going to nearby public lands, BLM land, or places where you might be hunting, in anticipation of the fall, and trying to scout out the area, looking for signs, maybe setting up trail cams if you have the money for that, maybe not, or trying to garden. And you plant too early one year, you plant before Mother's Day, and oh crap, a late frost came and wiped out my, little shoots. You get a sense of what the seasonal cycles are. You get you begin to develop an understanding of what the acidity of your soil is like. It's like, oh, blueberries are doing great here. These other plants, not so much. We need a little bit more nitrogen here. We need a little bit, you begin to develop a sense of the land that you live on, which is its own kind of cool connection that food facilitates.
Mm-hmm.
Which is interesting that, in urban areas, that's almost to the level of sort of like an elite luxury. In some of, like I live in the DC metro, and yeah, for sure. And that's probably why, there's sort of maybe perhaps on the left, this sort of, community gardens within cities, tied in with the idea of food deserts, which are definitely real. Here in DC metro, there's places where, and really old people, have to spend half of their day, like, they get 7-Eleven is their choice, to get food. And that's not sustainable for a society or for an individual. But yeah, community gardens in city areas, it seems to be that, what you were just talking about is something that people want, like it satisfies something for sure.
Yeah,
it's sort of the best they can get out of it, but usually, like in city areas, the people doing that, it's usually a little bit on the hipster side.
Oh yeah, at least I think that's being fairly generous.
Speaking of community, we've been going for an hour. Should we read through some of these comments here? We've actually been getting a fair number.
Yes, good.
Mick Tubis mentioned that he was Sicilian. This is correct. He also said Philadelphian, pretzels and pierogies for the win. I always considered veganism to being a result of watching too many of those cartoon movies that anthropomorphize animals and objects to save the rainforest. Saying this as someone who watched Brave Little Toaster one too many times as a kid.
I mean, it's not wrong. I mean, it's I mean, Bambi is basically anti-hunter propaganda. It's that 100% has changed. Well, I mean, on the far end of it, it creates furries, but like on the far end, it creates furries, but in the medium end, it obviously makes all animals more cute and innocent. And this is why women think that they can, are safer with bears in the woods, because they thinking Yogi Bear,
Yeah. Daniel Rose says less industrialized cultures get along with seasonality, and that limitation contributes to their culture. Italians making sauce from tomatoes because they can't get them at the grocery all year long. Yeah. I heard one interesting commentator say that air conditioning, this might have been Michael Malice. I can't remember exactly, but they were saying air conditioning was wrecking community because back when it was too hot to sit out inside, you had to all come out as a community on the front porch where there was a bit of a breeze, and that would lead to socializing. I don't know how true that is in all places. Probably true in some places. Nick Tuba says
someone just said once said a friend of mine came here and you just commented on, I mean, this place can't even exist without air conditioning. Like it'd be nothing but like skeletons sitting beside cactus trees. Like
and you put that text underneath the picture of all the people dying in the sun saying no cell phones in sight, just people living in the moment. No cell phones because all the cell phones died from the heat as well.
Yeah. That's a real problem.
McTuba
if you
says,
put your phone in your dash like while you're driving, it'll die.
Yeah.
It's too hot outside. Yeah. Go ahead.
McTuba says, old enough to remember when they added pizza as a vegetable. I don't know what kind of pizza that must have been. Daniel Rose says, some of us were eating nothing but seal and still are. Well, that's hardcore.
Yeah.
McTubis, Mithridatism through food. Yep. Daniel Rose, I also know someone with that same experience. Took some months to recover his veggie tolerance. I assume he was talking about the going carnivore and becoming fragile to all non-carnivore foods.
For sure.
My grandmother lived to 103, only died after complications weeks after a double hip replacement after falling down a flight of stairs. Well, I would say I'm sorry to hear that, except, most people dying from falling downstairs are in their like 70s or 80s. So 103 is pretty amazing. He was also Sicilian, so maybe some genetics or cultural work at play there.
She was smoking a cigarette and drinking a glass of wine when she fell down the stairs.
That's why she fell. Yeah. but her being slightly wine drunk helped protect her body from the injury. I think that's an urban legend many people talk about with alcohol. Probably. Daniel Rose says, plants may be a poison worth tolerating, but the same response to processed foods tells the seal enters they should stick to seal. Seal eaters, they should stick to seal. Yeah, maybe if you're one of those Inuit Amerindians that just eats seal blubber for 80% of your food. McTuba says she was fresh off the boat, didn't speak a word of English. Blue zones are largely explained by lifestyle and community as much as food. Almost certainly. Food isn't sufficient, but it is probably necessary. Necessary, but insufficient. McTuba says, having something to live for has a big role too. Yes. Said grandmother was cooking for us every weekend in a one-person cookie cannoli factory. That's awesome.
Nice.
James Williams says, what's up, everybody? Daniel Rose says, Impossible Burger appeals to practicality, whereas vegan vegetarianism appeals to identity and status. He also says, so nobody who wants meat will care that it's not meat, and nobody who wants to be vegan wants to admit they want meat. Yeah, there is some weird psychology at work with the fake meat.
Well, as you, I think one of you guys or maybe both said at different times during the show, there is a high status thing associated with abstaining from certain things. Like we don't eat
priestly
because exactly, priestly class stuff. Like where that's filthy. That's for the low people, and we eat the fine things. And if they've received all this propaganda, which is the case, that they're saving the world and they're morally pure for eating the garbage paste burger thing.
Environmentalism is a big part of, a lot of people are vegan for that purpose because they think it's the environment. But then there's also, it's this whole, like, I don't want to be responsible for the death of an animal. Well, you are, even if you're a vegan. You just don't see it. And then, this sort of like, oh, it's natural. It's like, well, but you can't survive without factory produced vitamin B12. There's plenty of factory produced pills that are very great, that people like or that people need, of course. But if you do not take that pill, you are going to get sick, and you're going to be really bad off, because the human body, it's proven, cannot function without vitamin B12, and it only comes either synthetically or from animals. Mm-hmm. And even the most the most strictly vegetarian food cultures that have like a history that goes back millennia, they are not vegan. Perhaps as an austerity at certain times, or the Coptic Christians, Ethiopia, their version of Lent involves full veganism, but it's an austerity. It's for a temporary period of time.
My uncle sent me an Orthodox Christian calendar once, and a good solid third of the year was blocked out in various feasts and fasts. That's very, very food regimented.
But the vegans, it always boils down to you're bad because you cause violence.
Oh yeah.
So you're doing something wrong and evil. You're hurting someone, and I don't want to be that. Yeah. Therefore, I'm better than you.
Right. There's a tangent worth going on here with the mentality that sort of is related to food but transcends food, with all of the ecological system, with these people who think that they can understand something as inherently chaotic as the weather or the ecosystem. There was one of the most emotionally intense TED Talks I think I ever saw. It was a scientist who was working in Africa on desertification and the collapse of the forests in Africa. And they were one of their mechanisms for dealing with this. They said one of the problems was roving bands of elephants would like trample new stuff. And they're like, this is a problem. And so they ended up shooting like 150 elephants over the course of like some like decades or so, trying to prevent this expansion of deserts in Africa. And they discovered that this made the problem worse. And that after some more intensive research and observation and testing and studying, they found that, oh no, actually what the elephants were doing was moving water around and stirring up the soil. They were actually a guard against some of this desertification, and we're actually helping facilitate the force. That many scientists have come to a similar conclusion about the North American continent, about how the decline of the bison population has led to an expansion of these grasslands and deserts, as opposed to the forests that once dominated the West. And so, like, this scientist was talking about how he wrongfully killed like 150 elephants or so. And I don't think those were eaten or anything. They're just killed for the sake of, science or whatever. And a similar thing happens with people who try to save the environment through not eating meat. On the one hand, first of all, vegetarian diets that require intensive agricultural cultivation, if you know anything about that process, you understand how many animals get killed in the maintenance of those crops, and not just like prairie dogs and things. It kills a lot of animals. And the effects of hunting are not what people think they are on populations. One of the most underrated organizations in American wildlife ecology of the last 40 years was a group called Ducks Unlimited. There was a time in the United States where ducks were on the verge of being like endangered. They were I forget the term, not quite endangered, threatened species, I think. Mm-hmm. And Ducks Unlimited was a group of hunters who got together to try to help the duck population. Basically, they came up with policies and plans to try to make things easier for the duck population and bring the duck population back up. And it was so successful that there was a point, if I remember correctly, that there was a concern the duck population had grown too high. Now, I don't know who would make that call, but the incentives for eating meat is more animals. Now, there's a danger there, as you talked about with turkeys. Industrial farming is not a pretty thing. Right. However, that's not what Ducks Unlimited was doing with ducks in the wild. And, with people keeping animals in their backyards, people keeping, chickens, as Tim Pool has been advocating, as me and my wife have been trying to do. We had a crazy summer a couple of years ago where we got 2 Nigerian dwarf goats. That was not a wise choice in the suburbs. It was fun, crazy, not a wise move, and it was only for 1 year. One of them got by a coyote, and the other one, our friend Clinton, took off my hands, and who knows from there. But but those animals that are on people's private properties have fantastic lives, by all objective metrics. And, there's not just enjoyment for the animal, but enjoyment of the animal and our connection with food and power of that we enjoy ourselves over our food, over the land, over our connection with our food and with the land. And, the people who try to control everything from the top down, it's like, oh, we're facing this problem, so we're going to create grand sweeping policies about what people are going to eat, what animals get to live or die, how people are going to interact with nature and so forth. They invariably cause more harm than good, and they never seem to learn. There's this, sorry to go on so long, but it's an extremely annoying subject that people don't ever seem to learn from this. They keep killing the elephants, like that one scientist, right. But before they have the self-awareness to give a TED talk, they move on to the next subject. They support banning apartheid in South Africa, and create massive campaigns to meddle in another country's politics or something, and then pay no attention to what the effects of that are downstream. Right. Curtis Yarvin has a last comment. This thought experiment of a person who comes up to a bad motorcycle accident, and the motorcyclist is on their side. He goes up to help. He tries to take the helmet off the motorcyclist, but because he doesn't do it properly, he breaks the neck of the motorcyclist, and the man's paralyzed now. And he says that person should be protected by Good Samaritan laws. They were trying to do their best, but a good person will be kept up by that. They will think long and hard about what they did wrong to hurt someone so badly, despite having the best of intentions, and they won't do that again. And it seems like the same sorts of people who are advocating veganism are the same sorts of people who have been running up to motorcycle accident after proverbial motorcycle accident on a civilizational scale, and causing it's Daisy and what's their name from The Great Gatsby. There's reckless people that keep breaking things and then moving on without any accountability. Not that there's necessarily anything we can do about those sorts of people, except begin to maybe not trust that type when they're giving dietary advice or political advice or economic advice, and developing those relationships with our own body and our food and the land ourselves. Long-winded rant to that.
Well, I think it's really good to be, I've learned this from my years of training and trying different diets and having diet coaches and things like that, and just trying different things myself, is it makes you a little bit resistant to the latest claim. Like that's just an age and experience thing to a certain extent. Like, and also, I've seen a little bit into the inside working of health influencer world, that I know people are a little bit full of shit all the time. And so, like, I think it's better to be slow to adopt new, like, wild claims that people were making new trends. Okay, everybody's doing a thing. Wait and see. You're like, everybody's doing a thing. You just wait and see a little bit, see how this plays out for a little bit, and then you're like, okay, well, I'll try this. Like my one, as far as this isn't a food thing, but it's related. As a proper cult, we need to have like all kinds of special grooming things and food things and whatever. And one of the things that is a trendy thing right now, but I picked it up and I'm 100% sold on it, is tallow. Like tallow for everything. Tallow fixes everything. No, it doesn't fix everything, but you can use it for a lot of stuff, and it's really like, it makes a lot of sense, and it's cheap. I got some. I have all the little bottles I was going to sell as a product. But I'm like, I don't need another business of make some low profit thing that I don't need to do that. But so I might even do a thing myself, because I was always looking for a beard, like some kind of, people use beard oil and all that kind of stuff. And I never liked this drops of oil on like face. Like, what is that? And so I bought some tallow that someone else had been advertising for, like a moisturizer or something like that. And I'm like, hey, why wouldn't I just put that on my beard? It's basically a conditioner, right? But so it's basically just beef fat that's been rendered, and it doesn't have any smell to it. Like, it's been really, really, really cleared out, so it doesn't have any real smell to it. But it's food. And so like you would think that it would make your skin greasy and make you break out, but it doesn't, because it's the exact composition of like what was actually supposed to go in your skin. And so like, it as a beard softener, because my beard will get crunchy, especially in weather like this, get dry and crunchy. And so I put it in my beard, put it in my face. You can put it on your, like as a moisturizer for anything. You can jerk off with it. I didn't say that. You can use a lube. You can literally use it for anything, and it's food. So instead of like, if you get a moisturizer from the store, right, and put it on your face and it gets in your mouth, it's gross because it's full of chemicals and garbage, right? But this, like what I use for mine is like I flavor it with, I wouldn't have thought this, but I went to the natural food store and got all the different scents and whatever and played around with them. The essential oil that is the essence of ginger, like fresh grated ginger, whatever. I put this in that and you mix it with honey. A lot of people mix it with honey. So you have this honey ginger fat, basically. And so you're putting it on your face, and then you get some in your mouth, and you're like, oh, that's fucking delicious. And and it smells kind of good. And it's like,
sounds like the preparation for some like ancient like ritual, like some Homeric description of like anointing a sacrificial animal with, honey and oats, this and that, and the rendering the fats or wrapping the fat around the thigh meat with honey and this and that. It has that kind of sound to it.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's like when I thought of it, I was gonna put it out as a product called Bull, because I'm like, okay, it's literally like beef fat used as a beard oil. I mean, like, that's fucking genius. But it has a lot of, all kinds of people were selling it online for this now, like beef tallow. But like, you can get a tub of it from like Amazon for like $25 or something like that, and it'll last you for like the rest of the next 3 years. There's so much of it, and it's just like, rather than all these things that everything's so expensive now. So that's my latest. It's not quite a food trend, but it kind of is food. I think I'm like I said, 100% sold on it. That is good stuff.
Yeah. Yeah, and there isn't anything necessarily bad in trying things and experimenting. I remember when sunning novel parts of your body was a fad a few years ago. And we were mentioning Tanner Guzzi, last week, because we were talking about his subjects, fashion and style. But he put out a video at the time that was becoming a trend. And he said, you know what I love about this trend is it's people doing science. It may or may not be real, but I love that people are like giving it a shot. Now, where it gets a lot less cool is if people hear it from a few sources that they inherently trust, and they're like, this is true. It's very important that you do this thing. It's like, no.
Then fast
That's
forward,
not how the
you have
internet
literal
works.
pictures of dudes showing pictures of their feet in the air because they're sunning their balls. Making themselves look like assholes while displaying
so
their
to speak.
That was easily the worst trend of that time period.
Yeah, but
I get the point that you're making.
But as far as experiment and all points to those guys who were like, yeah, I did 8 weeks of daily cold baths, and these were the effects I had. It was positive effects in here, actually negative effects in the gym, which surprised me. And like they have an honest feedback that develops their own relationship with their body, and that's, I think, the process that people need to have when it comes to food as well. Is like there's a certain line you will sometimes hear, particularly people from the left, but not exclusively, when it comes to news and political news, when they're presented by some argument that says you can't trust this news source, you can't trust these people, this source lies, that source lies, this source lies. They're like, well, we have to trust somebody. Yeah. And that's actually not true. You don't actually have to trust anybody. You can, as Christopher Hitchens did, decide to get into the news and go investigate things yourself because you don't trust the news. And you can do that with food too. You don't have to trust any source on food. Right. You can just try things and see how you feel. And it might take some time. You might realize how out of touch you are with your own body sensation. You might be like, one of my 4 or 6 year olds with no sensation of the connection between, I just had 3 cookies and now I'm bouncing off the walls and I have no idea why. Adults can be like that too sometimes. Hopefully less so, but
and you don't have to decide that it's the only way. It's like, okay, I fucking hate vegans, but if I mix whey protein, if I mix whey isolate with milk, actual milk, doesn't matter what kind of milk it is, full fat or skim milk, I get a fucking stomach ache that won't quit. If I mix those two things together, and it's because I experimented with it. If I mix it with almond milk, I'm fine, and it's basically 0 calories. It's like adding like 30 calories. Almond milk is basically air.
Yeah.
But it makes it taste all right. It goes down just fine, and I feel great. But I don't have to go on the internet and tell people, if you're mixing whey with milk, you're destroying your gut health, and you are a very bad person, and you're doing everything wrong. And also don't have to like become a transhumanist vegan.
Yeah.
Have whey protein isolate anyway, but I don't have to go and advertise that,
your orthorexic anxiety is killing your gut health more than any food.
For real. Another point is that you said you don't have to trust any source, but you can trust people. Yes. Like I have a doctor who will also experiment on himself. And he's like, I tried this, it didn't work. I looked at all the markers, I read all the reports, like while I was doing it, and this didn't work for me. I tried the same thing and it worked for me. And so we have like a difference of opinion for our actual like science that we've been doing on ourselves. And like right now, same thing. I was like, this is embarrassing, but I saw on TikTok that L-carnitine was really good if you inject it. I asked my doctor about it, and he's like, I tried it, and I didn't really get anything out of it, but if you want to, I can get you some. And so like he got me some injectable L-carnitine, so I'm injecting myself with L-carnitine every day to see if it has any, because it's supposed to like help with brain function as well as like fat loss and all kinds of things. So it's supposed to be really just good for you generally. People take it in an oral supplement, but what people were saying was that you lose a lot of it in the digestive process, and that it's better if you inject it. And so like I was like, I'll give that a shot. So I've been doing that. So I actually do science on myself all the fucking time. Nice. I'm a science project. So I'm like, let's see if this works. Let's see if this works. I mean, like I said, I've tried every diet, and I've found certain things work for me, and they don't always work for other people, or they aren't like me and Ed doing the same diet is not real. Like we talk about diet enough. Like my diet that I'm on at like 40 pounds heavier probably would starve Ed. He would die, because he can eat so many more calories than I can.
Even though lately I'm eating quite a bit less, but like
but you're cutting, so yeah.
Not a day goes by where if I open up the internet every day, I will for sure see somebody telling me that white rice is killing me and I'm gonna die, right? And I eat white rice 7 days a week for basically at least the last 20 years.
Chicken and rice has been a the chicken offsets the Buddhist symptoms of the rice.
The Buddhist, and that is a teaser to what our next show is. And I don't know if you caught that's our next show, but our next show is why Buddha is a fag. Yeah. I mean, I'm going to call him a hipster. I'm going to call him a hipster in the type, so we don't get like cut by like Amazon. But I did a little AMA the other day, and I was running my mouth and said that Buddha is a fag, and like I got some messages. Everybody like, I've never heard anyone say that. It's kind of true. and so that's and we don't mean a homosexual fag. We mean like fag like on South Park. Like the South Park definition of fag, like someone I don't like who does something annoying. Basically. But we'll talk about that more. I might do a newsletter, and then we'll do a show about Buddha, because I think that would be fun. We don't have to actually get into a lot of Buddhism, but just the Buddha story and why Buddha's a fag. I think it'll be spicy. People like it. But yeah. Anyways, that's a little teaser for next time.
Yeah. Speaking of Buddhism and veganism, I feel like everybody has like their own recreational beliefs that are like maybe not super justified, but like it's fun to believe. As far as how everyone's kind of different, one of my recreational beliefs, I should say, is which I inherited from my grandfather on my mom's side, is that people's optimal diets are somewhat predicted by blood type. I have no evidence for this. It's a recreational belief. But there are some smart people who think this, so could be true. There's
a whole cult around that. You don't hear about it as much now, but in the early 2000s, it was,
I'm sure if you looked up blood type diet, there's probably a book.
Yeah, it was called Eat Right for Your Blood Type. Was the name of the book. And in the very early 2000s, people would come up to you at the shopping mall, like, to tell you about it. Like,
no, I know that I could live on nothing but animal protein and fruit and some vegetables. And I would be great. Other people I've known say like that they can't do that. They need more vegetables than I eat, and they need some grains. They need some starch to get them through. And some of that might be genetics, some of that might be blood type, some of that might be lifestyle as well. There was
or gut stuff or whatever. I mean, like and like the genetic stuff. Like a lot of people, like bodybuilders, they'll swear by rice, but especially with the paleo thing, people got really like down on grain, like bread. People got really like bread is poison, it's bad for you, and I do a lot better. Now I get the Dave's. I get the Dave's bread with all the
killer
garbage
bread.
in it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I get Dave's killer bread without all the garbage in it, so there's that. But I eat that, and I do a lot better than that than with rice. Sometimes rice will like go through me in like 10 minutes.
My wife has been on the sourdough train for the last like 3 or 4 years. So
that's
what we eat.
That's a hot thing right now. Like,
oh yeah,
I've heard things about that. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, she not only does it, she helped write some courses on it. So for people too.
Nice. So, yeah.
It's very, very nice. Both the bread and the like sourdough pancakes. You get the sourdough focaccia bread earlier tonight. All kinds of fun things you get. It's just one more way to make cooking and eating fun. The more connection you have with your food, whether it's your own, pig that you slaughtered and you still got half of it in your freezer, or your own chicken eggs that you're eating every day for breakfast, or, the vegetables you grew from the garden, or the berries that you grew and then turned into jam. If you're making a sourdough bread, it's just one more thing that you made, and it's more fun. It things that you make yourself taste better subjectively, I think.
That is an interesting thing to go off on, and Dylan would want us to talk about that. Dylan from our group is very like the human relationship with food and eating, and
this is way up his alley.
Yeah, totally, and it just made me think of him. But there's two different ways to go with that, and it just depends what your goals are too. I mean, I've gone down the route, and I know that Ed has, of like, I'm going to do some fancy ass like 2-day long cooking, to make some like elaborate French shit or like whatever, like some things that are like take some investment,
some
time.
Gourmet Hawaiian burgers,
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's my favorite meal to cook. Is I'll still do Thanksgiving. We don't really have usually anybody to give it to, like, really now. That's the kind of the bummer thing about it. But like, we used to have some guests that were regulars for that. But I like making a big turkey. Like, I will spend the time on it and spend a lot of money and do like, I do it in kind of a very French way, and there's a specific way that I do it and I serve it, and like we've done it for so many years that it's like, okay, well, you're making that, I'm making that. I always fuck that part up. You do that. We have it all planned out as to how we're gonna do it now, and I have to make the gravy, and it's like being a saucier, and it's like, and you're like making it perfect, doing the roux and the whole deal, but yeah, that is a lot. That's really fun to be that involved with your food.
Well, and then all out with all these different, there's so many different varieties of textures, colors, temperature. All of those things matter. Like when you're putting effort into it, you have to consider like cold, warm, hot, crunchy, slurpy. And there's food traditions where that's like really important, where like there has to be things on, you need to have something that's chewed, something that's sucked, something that's, drunk. And there's a lot of people that just don't, there's those type of people that textures freak them out. They want like sort of everything to be soft, or, let's speak of flavor preferences. We're all born with sweet. Sweet is the only inherent human thing. Every single thing else is learned. All flavor preferences are learned. And there are cultures, the Bengali people, Bangladesh and the Bengal state in India, intensely bitter flavors are like ambrosia to them. They love them. There's, and there's philosophy behind it, all of this stuff, but they love bitter tasting things. But most human beings are, we retch or we're repelled. It's something that tells us poison, really bitter flavors.
Right.
Well, they tell you're a sociopath if you like bitter things. That's like, I've seen articles
black
about
coffee.
that. Like, If people who like bitter things are sociopaths, I like bitter things, so I don't know what that says.
I like bitter flavors also. Actually, they say that they have a saying there that it's part of their cunning. It's part of the typical lunch meal. It's the first thing you eat, and so they say that it's actually a trick, because then everything else you eat after that is going to taste, sort of like really good, because you started
clever.
with something. But it stimulates, it's I've had as a personal experience and through experimentation that eating something really bitter as the first few bites stimulates like digestion. And that's why there's these bitter drink traditions.
Like Fernet.
Yeah, exactly.
That's almost more psychological than that reminds me of, sort of in the inverse, is the American converse of eating super bitter foods in order to intensify the things that come after that, was the perhaps misguided attempt by certain American evangelical Christians to curb masturbation with really, really, really bland foods. Graham crackers.
Kellogg.
Yes. Yeah. But there's an interesting philosophy of food at work, and the relationship that they want people to develop with their food, or to develop for them, in order to control their behavior. And I don't know if that was successful or not. I would imagine not.
Well, Kellogg still made a lot of money. It's still around.
There's that.
So there's that.
Yeah.
I don't know whether it stopped. It clearly didn't stop masturbation.
That's what I mean. Yeah. And similarly, I've heard, and I'd have to double check. So just take this as hearsay. Someone double check this before you take this as gospel. But my recollection is that the guy who came up with the food pyramid for the United States government was a Seventh-day Adventist.
Yeah, there you go.
And that there was some religious belief that might have worked its way into where meat was placed on that pyramid.
They're strongly lean towards vegetarianism, and they follow the Sabbath on Saturday, and they have this big fucking wacky dish called Special K loaf. And it's basically like an egg.
I remember the 90s. Oh wait, say a different one.
Wait, Special K is not a cereal?
Yeah, it's Special K cereal. It's Special K cereal made into this sort of kugel-like thing, if you know what that is. It's basically an egg Special K casserole that you can prepare ahead of time and eat it when it's the Sabbath.
Oh, so you don't have to be cooking.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Bonkers.
Okay. Yeah.
I feel like the hybrid Indian frontiersman pemmican culture is a better pre-meal prep food culture to go off of. You could live off just bison fat and oats or whatever that was. Berries mixed in too. Basically, protein power bars of the 1860s.
You can live off a whole bunch of things.
That's true. Doesn't mean you should necessarily.
Or if you want to, but
right.
We're.
Oh, I was going to say that there's the deep connection with food that is very normal for humans. These big processes. And a way that women did things, a lot of times, this is the women's contribution, and people were talking about their grandmas who were made things and whatever. That was what they did. When the guys came out here last time, Ed has watched me turn into an Italian grandmother and cook a whole bunch of dudes spaghetti. I like to think myself more as the Godfather in prison, but whatever. I made everybody spaghetti. Kind of cut nuts doing that while they were here. But because it seemed like a good thing for a whole bunch of guys I'm like, I can make a lot of it. So there's that deep connection with food. And then there's also the way that I eat 90% of my life now, especially when we talk about health things, and not necessarily health for vitality, but health for looking a certain way or achieving some kind of athletic goal. food becomes very scientific at that point. I mean, most of us, a lot of us in the group actually track our food every day. I mean, I think I'm about 248 grams of protein in today. I think that's the number. If I had, I'd have to look at my phone to double check, but I think I broke 240. And so like we all track these things, and it's a very particular way of eating. Like I eat almost the same thing every day. And there's no connection with it, and it is literally just fuel, and it's there for the numbers. Like I've figured out how to make something hit the numbers that doesn't gross me out. Like if I'm not like, oh, this is awful. If we can get down to like, this is fine. That's fine. That's all I need to get to. And if I can get something good, like right now, I usually have one thing that I'll focus in on, and keep repeating that until I get sick of it, and then I move on to something else. Right now, it's a fake Chick-fil-A sandwich. Basically, because chicken breasts are really cheap here. They're like $2.50 a pound, and I'm just buying like sheets of them. Nice. I'll come home to the grocery store with 3 giant trays of fucking chicken breasts, and that'll last me like 4 days. Because I eat at least a pound of chicken breast a day, and so we have some like Mexican spices or whatever from Costco that I put them on the grill the whole thing at one time. So I have all these grilled chicken breasts sitting around, and then I'll use that Dave's Killer Bread, the bun for a bun, and then just have low fat mayonnaise and some mustard and some dill pickles slices on top. And it's kind of how I remember. I haven't been in Chick-fil-A in forever, but like just the mayonnaise and mustard thing. I don't think they have ketchup on their chicken sandwiches, but like it seemed like, I'm like, this seems like pretty close to what I remember it tasting like, and it's pretty good. Like I'm fine with it, but other people will be like, what do you eat? But I actually turned my friend on because my last one was 99% fat-free turkey burgers with Velveeta.
Yeah.
I have a guy out in LA who like now makes them for his friends because these are really good, right?
I mean, you say there's no connection there. It's purely scientific, but that's you've arrived at this after years of experimenting and seeing what your body has preferences for, and you're making it yourself. This meal prepping is not just something I hear from bodybuilders. It's also something I hear from I don't want to say finance bros because that has a different connotation, but people who are on like the Dave Ramsey like debt snowball and they're trying to save their money.
Right.
It's a cost saver as well to meal prep, and it is taking charge of your own food rather than throwing yourself at the mercy of the gas stations that happen to be closest to your work, or paying $10 for a freaking double cheeseburger or something.
It's eating like an adult. That's one of the aspects of it.
Right.
Going right back to the start. I mean, I'm grateful. I have certain skills. Dealing with food and a lot of sort of international influences, so I can turn something really simple, that ultimately is about how many numbers on the food scale and trying to reach macros for the day, but I can make it a lot more interesting. And then I'll do the same thing for days at a time. And throughout the day, I just do whatever it takes. But then like the evening meal is usually shared with somebody else. So I need to make sure that, that it's good also.
Right.
But yeah, it's totally, that's part of eating like an adult and understanding what the result is. And it does take experimentation, for each individual person, but it takes a lot of trial and error, like what's going to work. And sometimes it is a little bit like, oh, man, like how many different things do I have to put on this scale?
It's and you can go into dark periods if you get if you go real hard. What bodybuilders do a lot of times, you get your egg whites cooked egg whites with sriracha on top of it is like that's rolling deep. Because that's the only thing that makes it like edible. So you just sriracha, but it has no calories. So
egg whites can be like if you cook the egg whites like just like 10 seconds too long, then they do that leaching out of water.
Yes.
Like you can't take it too far. If you cook them too much, then like they become like this watery. It's gross.
Then you have to take a paper towel and blot it. Yeah, like that's. Yeah.
And then you're wondering if there's protein in the water.
Yeah.
Should I have drank it?
Oh God.
But anyway, that could go real deep into the pros and cons. But I mean, some of it is purely macros that isn't even food prep. I mean, you know, like when you get into protein shakes and stuff like that, you're just eating numbers, and there's an appeal to that. And then I think we should probably wrap up because it's probably long.
We've got some comments here too, including
we'll get
one
to those in a
particular
second.
interesting
Let me do this one, but unless I lost it, shit,
sorry,
I lost it. All right, yeah, go ahead.
We've got a lot of comments, but I wanted to jump to one that was kind of halfway down. Saxon Van Bentley says, "I've lived with Alan Savory in Zimbabwe. I teach this to farmers here in Australia. The desertification of the earth is a direct result of the loss of predators and giant herds." So one of our commenters and viewers was actually there studying that, which is fascinating regarding the elephant stuff. Mick Tuba says, "Never met anyone who visited India without developing gastroenteritis."
It happens early on, and then if you just keep going back, you drink the water.
James Williams says, "Lol, the redcoats are coming." No diddy. I'm assuming that's in reference to our hunting talk in class.
Yeah.
He says, "As far as designing a diet, I found that humans are largely supposed to be fruitarians, to include nuts. Grains are for poors, and beef is a nice treat." Maybe. Mick Tubis says,
Nietzsche ate tons of fruit and he had terrible digestion.
That's true.
Complained about it. Yes. Go on. Yeah.
Mick Tuba says the pizza as a vegetable was a U.S. Congress ruling from 2011.
Yeah.
Well, that's freaking hilarious, and maybe educational as to the competence of Congress if there was still doubt in our crowd about that.
Well, there's also we talked yesterday in the group somewhere about the whole raisin conspiracy, which is a whole different rabbit hole, like how raisins are controlled and why people are told to eat raisins and whatever. But what were the next comments?
Yeah, Brock says, "What's with the record low levels of testosterone? That's the biggest impact modern diet seems to actually have." Diet's probably a big part of that. You ever see those pictures of like the Mongolian warriors next to the Chinese like laborers, and the Mongols are like a head and a half taller and like thick, and the Chinese guys there's diet talk about that too. I had a long conversation with my daughter about the Mongolian diet and yogurt and all that. James Williams says, "Plants scream when you eat them. The humane argument for vegetarians is odd. Plants are sentient too." True. Daniel Rose says, I think one of my favorite internet memes was this Indian guy who said, "I'm not a vegetarian because I love animals. I'm a vegetarian because I hate plants."
That's a classic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Daniel Rose says, "Most livestock is raised on land in the western states that is unsuitable for agriculture. So framing animals as competition for more efficient crops is misinformed." Also true. People not understanding large systems and why things are the way they are.
There's cornfields beside me. I live in the desert. There's cornfields and then giant cattle herds. Not cattle herds, but like dairies or whatever. Yeah.
There are places that could be made, arable, but at what cost?
Yeah.
James Williams says, "You also get properly filtered water from fruit as well, which is nice since most of the Earth's water is undrinkable with salt, animal poop, and bacteria in it." Yeah, fruit's nice for a lot of reasons. Lots of good nutrients and other stuff. This is maybe not blood type, but regions of genetic origin. Have you guys heard of Dr. Sebi? I have not. Again, I don't want anyone to think my recreational belief about blood type is like real science. It's just a recreational belief. But
I like the term recreational belief. I that's amusing in itself. But no, I was going to mention something like that when we were talking about paleo, because that was a discussion that happened, when people got really into paleo. It's like we don't all have the same ancestry. And so there's a big difference in what people can process. Famously, people from Northern Europe, they tolerate milk a lot better, than some other people. Because German milkmaids, and I never really had a problem with milk, but other people do. It's just because where they're from and their heritage and all that. So it's like figuring out your perfect diet of your ancestors is not as simple as what did cavemen eat, which is what everybody kind of goes to.
Geography, climate, all over the whole entire planet. There were completely different things available, and meat was not some easy thing. Especially, you have all these women and children as well, that had to participate. They weren't going out, hunting with spears. There was a good chance that a lot of people were clawing at trees to get fucking sap and honey.
Yeah, that was one of the lines from The Way of Men. Was the problem with animal protein, is that it doesn't want to die.
Yeah, that's true. Especially the shit that they were hunting really didn't want to die. It was big. But one of the other things is that somebody who's actually, I forget who I was talking to, that had actually studied hunter-gatherers, modern hunter-gatherers that still exist in tribes, whatever, and the shit that they ate was off the charts. They'd eat they'd eat meat one day, and then they'd climb up a tree and take a beehive down and eat all the honey, thousands of calories of honey, and that would be their meal for that day. And then they'd eat something totally different the next day, because they're just eating what they can find,
Yeah.
And so it's very different.
Was that the book by the dentist? There was a book, I forget the author's name. It was one my friend was recommending, and he was talking about it was focused on the effects on teeth, but it had broader implications about diet, but by looking at indigenous hunter-gatherers in Europe that were still around in the 1920s or 30s, but which aren't around anymore. I forget the author. Someone will know the title, I'm sure, because it was a fairly famous book. But it was, I think the Iceman Utsi was found with a weird variety of foods in his stomach, that because he was so well preserved that scientists could actually look in his stomach. This man who was found preserved in the glacier in the Alps, he had like 4 different kinds of meat in his stomach, as well as a variety of different plants and berries and stuff and roots. He had it was rabbit, one kind of deer, and then it was this kind of variety that comes from a whole beehive one day, and 2 crabs the next day, or whatever the case may be.
Yeah. Cool. So do we have any more comments? Then we should
yes.
wrap up.
Nick Westendorf says salt is actually good for you. Read The Salt Fix and Waterlogged. Well, without reading those 2 books, I would have assumed that. Yeah. But
remember, that was another one of those health lies that they told literally everybody that salt was going to kill you up until fucking
sodium.
20,
it's not salt,
2012. Because it's not, up until maybe mid 2010s, literally everyone was like, "There's salt on that." You're going to have a heart attack. And then now people literally buy salt packets to put in their fucking water. It's a hydration
electrolytes
thing.
now.
Yeah, it's electrolytes now. It's not. It used to be just sodium.
Daniel Rose says some Chinese dishes take texture to extreme to the point of neglecting flavor entirely. I hear that that's the premise behind shark fin soup. I've heard that shark fin soup is basically just straight texture. There's no flavor innate to it. But Daniel, some people experience sexual arousal with foods like chocolate and cheese. Others of us are missing out on that connection entirely. Yeah, I was always told that about oysters. I never got that.
No, they're just good and they look cool. That's my favorite. I said that in the chat. It's a weird fixation that I have. Like there's like those old still life paintings of oysters on ice with like lobsters and stuff like that. I'm like, that's the way I want to see oysters. They have to be on a bed. And most places you go to will serve them like that. And that's the whole experience of eating oysters to me. It has to be on that plate of crushed ice. Otherwise, get the fuck away from me.
Mick Tubis says food in the bedroom is a whole nother stream topic.
I think that's one of those British fetishes. It's called sloshing. That's what it's called, sloshing. Kind of beans down.
As opposed to Mormon soaking. James Williams says, just added those to my Audible list. Nice. Nice. Not sloshing and soaking, but I assume that the salt fix and waterlogged. Daniel Rose says, diet has a strong influence on jaw development. Ooh, we're getting into a whole other niche subject. Many immigrants from cultures that eat natural foods have children in America, and feeding them soft foods, completely different facial structures.
Interesting.
Francis Pottinger's Cats. That's also from Saxon Van Bentley. I don't know what that's in reference to. But Mick Tubis says, it's got electrolytes. That's why I feed my vegetables Gatorade.
Yeah, it's what plants crave.
Yes. It was going to kill him last decade, but this decade it's in fashion, not style. So that's the end of our comments.
Cool.
Is there anything else we wanted to touch on?
No, I can't believe we had the busiest comment section ever on food. That's amazing. But I did not see that coming. But
it's a surprisingly fun subject, yeah.
But yeah, cool. So anyway, I guess we'll wrap up. And this, like I said, these shirts are available if anyone wants to check them out. I think they're pretty cool. I worked really hard to get them just the way I wanted them, and get something in the store or whatever. Hats we have as well, and other than that, I think that's all I got for you. And obviously the teaser for next week is about Buddha being a fag. So stay tuned for us to shit on Buddha. Because people said I would only make fun of Germanic pagans, but no, we're gonna make fun of Buddhists. And they say you're afraid to make fun of Muslims, but like honestly, like I don't have enough background to do that. I know you spent some time with reading about that stuff, but like I don't have a fixation on it. And as I said to some people, that Islam is very exotic and distant to Americans. It's not something like you're going to have issues with Christianity if you live in America and you're not a Christian. You're going to have some feelings about it because it's everywhere. But like Islam, that doesn't impact. It's like stuff that happens over there.
Yeah, I don't live in Minneapolis, so.
Yeah. Cool. Well, speaking of food, Lucy's cooking something that's really good and probably outside of my macros. But I'm like, what is that? But anyway, I guess we'll wrap up now. But thank you guys for tuning in and watching with us. And thanks, Ed, for joining us to talk about food today. And we will see you guys next week. Stay solar.
Stay solar.